Top 1. The Berserkers. The men at the front of the Viking line are not wearing armor. No chainmail, no helmet, just animal skin, bare arms, and teeth marks already pressed into the rim of a wooden shield. Before the first blow is struck, they are already somewhere else. Their eyes have gone wrong, and the men standing across the field know it. What we are dealing with here is not legend dressed up as history. The Berserker state is documented across sources that had no reason to coordinate their accounts. Snorri Sturluson compiled the Ynglinga saga around 1230 CE from older oral tradition. In chapter 6, he describes Odin's warriors going mad as dogs or wolves, biting their shields, strong as bears or bulls, killing men with single blows, proof against fire and iron. That same behavioral description appears in Byzantine imperial records from the 10th century, accounts written by soldiers who had themselves fought Persians, Bulgarians, and Arab armies. These were not men who impressed easily, yet they described Norse mercenaries entering battle, making sounds like wild animals, and they mean it as a military observation, not a metaphor. The word berserker appears in 27 separate Old Norse saga texts. The most detailed account comes from Egil's saga, which describes a berserker who could not be wounded from the front, but could be taken from behind, which suggests the state had physiological limits that enemy warriors learned over time to identify and exploit. This is not the description of a performance. This is tactical intelligence gathered from fighting them. The Icelandic law code Gragas, compiled in the 12th century from earlier law, made it a criminal offense to go berserk in a settlement, punishable by 3 years of exile. Not a religious offense, not a spiritual failing, a civic one treated with the same seriousness as arson. Byzantine Emperor Leo Wasanix banned berserkers specifically from palace service in his Tactica around 895 CE, not because they were unreliable, but because their combat state was uncontrollable, even by their own commanders. They were weapons that could not be switched off. Modern forensic work has added a physical layer to this picture. Neil Price at Uppsala University, researching Viking Age graves in the 2010s, identified skeletal remains from Gotland, Sweden, showing healed fractures consistent with blunt force trauma to the skull and ribs. Injuries requiring months of immobility to survive found in individuals who showed no reduction in physical activity afterward. Separately, Karsten Fatur, writing in Economic Botany in 2019, argued that henbane, a plant native to Scandinavia and documented in Viking Age ritual contexts, produces dissociative and analgesic states consistent with eyewitness descriptions. Something was happening, something physical and real. The suppression tells its own story. The berserker tradition was eliminated in Christianized Scandinavia within roughly a century of conversion. Norway's King Eric Bloodaxe outlawed them around 930 CE. That is fast. Cultures rarely move that quickly to erase something they consider merely theatrical. Scholars generally explain berserker behavior as a combination of ritual self-hypnosis, deliberate cultural performance designed to terrorize enemies before contact, and possible use of psychoactive substances. The combat trance in this view is a real psychological state, something close to what modern combat psychology calls a dissociative episode under acute stress amplified by pre-battle ritual, fasting, and years of psychological conditioning. The animal skins were costume. The shield biting was theater. The ferocity was real, but so is any soldier's ferocity under sufficient pressure. But theater does not survive Byzantine scrutiny. The empire that engineered Greek fire and produced the most sophisticated military manuals of the medieval world did not ban theatrical performances from the imperial palace. They banned something that frightened professional soldiers who had seen everything. And henbane, while genuinely dissociative, does not explain the fracture patterns, the evidence that these men absorbed wounds that should have ended them, then healed and fought again. Some researchers ask whether the berserker state was a real trainable neurological condition, something closer to a genuine alteration in pain processing under acute stress that could be deliberately induced through ritual preparation. Were the berserker guilds selecting for individuals with specific neurological profiles? People who could naturally access this state rather than conditioning ordinary men to perform it? If so, they were not warriors with a ritual. They were a self-selecting order of people for whom battle was the one environment where their nervous system worked exactly as it was designed to. We may never know for certain, but the speed with which the church moved to eliminate them suggests that whatever it was not something anyone wanted to leave lying around. Top 2. The Hashashin. From warriors who destroyed the boundary between pain and action, we travel to the opposite end of the Mediterranean, to men who weaponize something far more powerful than pain. They weaponize the fear of what you cannot see, the Hashashin. The vizier of the Seljuk Empire is surrounded by guards, walls, and attendants. He has been surrounded by them for years because he knows they are coming. Everybody powerful in the Islamic world knows they are coming eventually for someone. And then one morning, a man he recognizes, a face from the crowd, a petitioner he has seen before, someone unremarkable enough to have become invisible, slides a knife between his ribs. The man makes no attempt to escape. He is still standing there when the guards arrive. The Hashashin were documented in near real time. Islamic historians Ibn al-Athir and Rashid al-Din recorded their operations as they unfolded. The Crusader chronicler William of Tyre wrote about them around 1180. Marco Polo included a famous and probably embellished account in his travels around 1300. The fortress of Alamut, their mountain headquarters in the Alborz range of northern Persia, was excavated by Iranian archaeologists in the 20th century, confirming occupation dates and layout. Bernard Lewis produced the definitive modern scholarly analysis in The Assassins, a Radical Sect in Islam, in 1967, and his framing remains the foundation of serious study. For approximately 166 years, from 1090 to 1256 CE, a sect with never more than a few thousand members and no standing army successfully paralyzed every major power in the Islamic world. The first recorded political assassination was Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful vizier in the Seljuk Empire, killed on October 14, 1092 CE. Within 3 years, they had also killed the Seljuk Sultan, the Caliph's vizier, and the governor of Mosul. 4 high-value targets in 3 years with no state infrastructure, no standing army, and no territory beyond a handful of mountain fortresses. Lewis documented that the sect's founder, Hassani Sabah, held Alamut with approximately 70 fighters against a Seljuk force numbering in the thousands for over a decade. Not through military resistance, but through the calculated deployment of assassination threats that kept the Seljuks perpetually uncertain about where the next blow would land. William of Tyre records that the sect's leader received envoys from both Christian and Muslim rulers simultaneously because both sides had concluded it was more practical to negotiate than to fight an enemy with no territory to capture and no army to defeat in the field. A sect with no army was diplomatically recognized by every army. In 1192 CE, they assassinated Conrad of Montferrat, king-elect of Jerusalem, in the streets of Tyre, one of the most heavily defended Crusader cities in the Levant. 2 men in public in daylight. The identity of who ordered the killing remains genuinely disputed among historians to this day. The network survived 6 major Seljuk military campaigns against Alamut. None succeeded. The fortress fell only to the Mongols in 1256 under Hulagu Khan, and only after the last grandmaster surrendered voluntarily. Importantly, their operatives were not sent as suicide agents. They were specifically trained to escape after a killing when possible. The willingness to die was real but calculated. Dying was preferable to capture that could compromise the network, not the goal itself. The word assassin entered English through medieval French, Italian, and Latin, all derived from the Arabic hashashin. It is now standard vocabulary in at least 14 modern European languages. No other military organization in recorded history has contributed a common noun to this many languages. Scholars like Lewis interpret the Hashashin as a political religious movement, an Ismaili Shia sect using targeted killing as a rational strategic substitute for military force they could never field. The apparent fearlessness of their operatives reflected genuine religious conviction, combined with extreme psychological conditioning in the mountain fortresses. The Hashish story was almost certainly enemy propaganda. The elaborate paradise gardens Marco Polo described probably never existed. But rational strategy does not explain the patience. An operative who spent 3 years as a petitioner in a vizier's court, building a recognized face, learning a routine, waiting for one specific morning, that is not strategy in the ordinary sense. That is the complete erasure of a personal life in service of a single moment. What kind of training installs a trigger that can wait 3 years before firing? Some historians ask whether the Hashashin's real innovation was not the killing itself, but the psychological infrastructure surrounding it, the deliberate cultivation of their own legend as a weapon that never needed to be drawn. Every ruler knew the stories. Every ruler suspected the person they trusted most might be waiting. Supposedly, they understood 9 centuries before modern psychological warfare doctrine that the most effective weapon is one you never have to use because the enemy cannot stop imagining it. Whether that was conscious strategy or emergent effect, we may never fully untangle. Top 3 Aztec Jaguar and Eagle Warriors. From the mountain fortresses of Persia, we crossed the Atlantic to a city built on a lake where the greatest warriors on the continent were fighting a war they were doctrinally required to half win. The Aztec Jaguar and Eagle Warriors. The man across the field is trying to kill you. You are not trying to kill him. You are trying to take him home alive so that a priest can open his chest on top of a pyramid. And here's the terrifying part. He knows this. He knows exactly what your objective is. He knows you will not use your weapon the way he is using his, and he is still afraid of you. The Aztec military system is documented with extraordinary precision. The Codex Mendoza, compiled around 1541 from earlier sources, records the rank structure of the warrior elite in bureaucratic detail. The Spanish conquistadors who fought them, Hernán Cortés and Bernal Díaz del Castillo, left written accounts of what it felt like to face them. The anthropologist Inga Clendinen, in her 1991 study, Aztecs and Interpretation, produced the most rigorous modern analysis of the society's internal logic. In the ongoing excavations of the Templo Mayor directed since 1978 by Eduardo Matos Moctezuma have confirmed the sacrifice record in bone. The Cuauhtémoc, the Jaguar and Eagle Warriors, were elevated to elite status through a specific and ruthlessly measurable standard. To earn the rank, a fighter had to capture a minimum of 4 enemy combatants alive in open combat, not kill, capture. The Codex Mendoza records the specific costumes and privileges granted at each threshold. 1 captive, 2 captives, continuing upward to the highest ranks requiring 20 or more. It was a documented, bureaucratized hierarchy indexed entirely to living trophies taken from trained men who were actively trying to kill you at the time. The primary weapon was the macuahuitl, a wooden club edged with obsidian blades. Obsidian is edge for edge, sharper than surgical steel. Spanish accounts noted that the macuahuitl could sever a horse's head in a single swing, which means the restraint required to not use it lethally was the skill, not the blow itself. The warrior was carrying a weapon capable of instant killing and was expected to choose not to use it that way under live combat conditions against a man trying to end his life. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, writing in his True History of the Conquest of New Spain around 1568, describes the psychological impact of Jaguar warrior regalia on Spanish veterans who had fought in European wars and the Italian campaigns. Spotted pelts, wooden helmets carved as open animal jaws. He records that formed Jaguar warrior regiments caused these veterans to hesitate in ways they did not hesitate at any other enemy formation they encountered during the entire conquest. Leonardo Lopez Lujan and colleagues, publishing in Ancient Mesoamerica in 2010, confirmed that the Templo Mayor excavations recovered skeletal remains of over 200 individuals identified as sacrifice victims with perimortem trauma consistent with chest cavity incision, and that victims came from multiple ethnic groups consistent with the flower war procurement system functioning exactly as described. Inga Clendinen's analysis identified the deeper logic. The Aztec cosmological system required a specific volume of sacrificial deaths to sustain the solar cycles. The flower war was simultaneously military training and supply chain management. The Jaguar and Eagle Warriors were the empire's military elite and its priesthood's logistics arm at the same time. The mortality rate in the warrior class documented in tribute records was extraordinarily high. The capture requirement meant these men were accepting asymmetric risk as a spiritual discipline, facing opponents who were trying to kill them while they were trying to not kill back. Scholars including Clendenin and Ross Hassig in Aztec Warfare from 1988 interpret the Flower War as a rational solution to a specific theological and political problem. The empire needed sacrifice victims at scale. Neighboring polities provided a sustainable source, and the system was internally consistent with Aztec cosmology. The terror of the warrior regalia was deliberate psychological theater layered on top of genuine military function. But theater performed by men fighting under a one-hand disadvantage who kept winning anyway suggests the theater was built on something real. The mainstream explanation accounts for the system's purpose, but not for how it produced warriors capable of subduing trained opponents who were actively trying to kill them. Some researchers ask whether the capture-only doctrine paradoxically created a superior combat system, whether warriors trained to control rather than kill develop a more precise and adaptable fighting skill than warriors trained simply to end a fight. If you can take a man alive, you can certainly kill him. The reverse is not true. Was the Flower War the ancient world's most sophisticated martial discipline disguised as theology? And what does it mean that when the conquest removed the rule and Aztec warriors began fighting to kill, Cortés himself wrote to Charles V that the fighting in Tenochtitlan became the most dangerous combat of the entire campaign? Top 4. The Spartans and the Cryptia. From warriors shaped by the rules of gods, we move to a society that raised its soldiers from the age of 7 inside a system so total and so precisely documented that we can trace every stage of what it did to them. The Spartans and the Cryptia. The boy has been alone in the hills for months. He has no food except what he can steal. He has no fire except what he dares to light. And when autumn comes, the state that sent him here will give him one final instruction: find a helot and kill him. Do not be seen. Come home. This was not a rumor or an exaggeration passed down by enemies. The Cryptia is documented in Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, written around 100 CE, which describes it in specific procedural detail. Thucydides and Plato both reference it. The agoge, the broader childhood training system that produced Spartan soldiers from age 7 onward, is corroborated in Xenophon's Constitution of the Lacedaemonians around 388 BCE. Modern scholars including Paul Cartledge in The Spartans from 2002 and Nigel Kennell in The Gymnasium of Virtue from 1995 have analyzed the system's structure and long-term consequences. Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, section 28, describes the Cryptia with directness. Young men were sent into the countryside with daggers, ordered to live off the land, and instructed to kill strong or capable helots, specifically those showing leadership potential among the enslaved population. The selection criterion for victims was not randomness, it was capability. The Cryptia was simultaneously officer selection and targeted counterinsurgency run on a schedule by the state using children. The legal infrastructure around it was deliberate. The Ephors, Sparta's 5 annually elected senior magistrates, formally declared war on the helot population at the start of each year. Aristotle, cited by later authors, confirms this as a standing legal instrument. It meant any Spartan citizen could kill any helot without incurring the religious pollution associated with homicide. This was not a loophole, it was architecture. The agoge itself began at age 7. Boys were taken from their families, housed in barracks, deliberately underfed, beaten regularly, and forbidden to wear shoes regardless of season. Plutarch records that boys were expected to steal food, but were severely punished not for stealing, but for being caught. The lesson was not honesty, it was operational competence under pressure. The demographic consequences were severe and documented. The Spartiate citizen class numbered approximately 8,000 to 10,000 at its 5th century peak according to Paul Cartledge's demographic analysis, declining to fewer than 1,000 by the 3rd century BCE. The agoge's casualty rate, combined with its deliberately delayed marriage age, Spartan males typically did not marry until their mid to late 20s, created structural demographic collapse over generations. At Thermopylae in 480 BCE, King Leonidas selected the 300, who would hold the pass specifically because all of them had living sons. This was population management applied to a last stand, and in 425 BCE, Thucydides records that Sparta entered rapid peace negotiations after the capture of just 120 Spartiates at Sphacteria, because the loss of 120 Agoge graduates was more strategically significant than any territory. One trained Spartiate was worth more than a city. It is worth noting how the system ended. The last Agoge-trained Spartan army was defeated at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE by the Theban sacred band under Epaminondas, a unit of 150 male couples whose emotional bond was deliberately used as a military cohesion mechanism. The Spartans, who had not lost a pitched land battle for 2 centuries, were broken by 300 men fighting for each other. Historians, including Cartledge, interpret the system as a rational response to a specific security problem. A small citizen class controlling a vastly larger enslaved population required total military readiness from every adult male enforced from childhood. The Crypteia was counter-insurgency training disguised as a rite of passage, simultaneously selecting the best officers and removing helot leadership under genuine operational conditions. But the system that produced the finest warriors in the classical Greek world also engineered its own extinction. The Agoges' design choices, late marriage, high training mortality, relentless population attrition, reduced Sparta from 10,000 citizens to 700 in under 2 centuries. Some historians ask whether Spartan society was not optimized for victory, but for identity, a state that valued the quality of its soldiers so absolutely it was willing to shrink itself to nothing rather than dilute the standard. In that reading, the Crypteia was not just training, it was sorting. Sparta was continuously asking who among us is capable of this and being willing, generation after generation, to have fewer and fewer people answer yes. Top 5. The Persian Immortals. The Spartans built a system to control the many with the few. The next empire solved the same problem differently by making the few appear infinite. The Persian Immortals. Your scouts have told you. Your prisoners have confirmed it. Every account from every engagement they have ever fought says the same thing. There are always exactly 10,000 of them. Not 9,000 after a hard campaign. Not 11,000 after reinforcements arrive. 10,000, always. And now they are forming at the front of the Persian line, and you are doing the arithmetic, and the arithmetic does not make sense. The immortals, called Anusia in Persian meaning companions, and Athanatoi in Greek meaning immortals, appear in Herodotus' histories around 440 BCE, the earliest and most detailed account we have. The Persepolis fortification tablets, administrative records discovered by archaeologist Ernst Herzfeld in the 1930s, document the Achaemenid military's logistics with remarkable bureaucratic precision. The Persepolis relief carvings provide the most detailed visual record of the unit's equipment, formation, and uniform standards. Herodotus in Histories, Book 7, Section 83, describes the replacement mechanism with clarity. Their number was never more nor less than 10,000. For when any man was taken off by disease or death, another was chosen so that they were never more nor fewer. This is a near contemporary account from a historian who spoke directly with Persian war veterans. He is not describing a myth. He is describing an administrative system. The Persepolis fortification tablets, excavated between 1933 and 1934 and analyzed by Richard Halleck in his 1969 publication, document daily ration allocations, personnel rosters, and travel records for the Achaemenid military in detail that confirms the empire's logistical infrastructure was sophisticated enough to support exactly the kind of real-time personnel management Herodotus describes. This was a bureaucracy capable of knowing at any given moment how many trained soldiers it had and where they were. The unit's visual consistency is itself evidence of institutional discipline. The Persepolis reliefs show the immortals wearing tiaras, carrying spears tipped with golden or silver pomegranates, and bearing wicker shields. And this uniformity is maintained across relief carvings from multiple sites across the empire. The uniform was not decorative, it was regulated. At Thermopylae, the immortals were thrown frontally against the Spartan-led Greek force and suffered significant casualties without breaking the defensive line. One of the few documented tactical failures of the unit in the historical record. The Persian response was not to reinforce or change the approach. It was to find the mountain path around the position. The immortals were used as a precision instrument, not a battering ram. And when the instrument did not cut cleanly, the response was to change the angle, not the instrument. The psychological weight of the immortal reputation is documented beyond Herodotus. Aeschylus's The Persians, performed in Athens in 472 BCE, just 8 years after the invasion, references the elite Persian infantry in terms suggesting their reputation preceded their physical appearance on any battlefield. And the concept proved durable. The Sassanid Empire, which ruled Persia from 224 to 651 CE, maintained an elite cavalry unit with the same name and the same constant strength replacement doctrine. Nicholas Secunda in the Persian army from 1992 estimates that maintaining the replacement pool necessary to sustain a 10,000-man unit at constant strength would require a total trained reserve of approximately 15,000 to 20,000 soldiers, held specifically for that purpose. Military historians explain the immortals as a carefully managed instrument, combining genuine combat effectiveness with deliberate psychological warfare. The immortal name was a calculated propaganda choice. The replacement mechanism served that message. You cannot reduce us. And the combination of distinctive appearance and unbroken numbers functioned as a morale weapon before any sword was drawn. But the morale effect requires the mechanism to actually work. You cannot sustain the illusion of an unbroken unit through a long campaign in front of enemies who can count. The Greeks who defeated the immortals at Plataea in 479 BCE faced a force that still numbered exactly 10,000. The propaganda only functions if the logistics function first. Some military historians suggest the immortals represent the first documented case of what modern armies call a force generation model, a unit whose institutional continuity is preserved not in its personnel, but in its structure and number. If that framing is accurate, the Achaemenids solved a core problem in military administration in 500 BCE that most standing armies in history did not formally address for another 2,000 years. The real impossibility, some researchers ask, may not be the 10,000 at all. It may be that they were keeping count in a way that nobody else was. Top 6. The Swiss Reisläufer. From the plains of ancient Greece and Persia, we travel west to a muddy field in Switzerland where peasant farmers with long sticks walked onto a battlefield and shattered the finest armored cavalry in Europe without once considering retreat. The Swiss Reisläufer. The Duke of Burgundy, Charles the Bold, commands the most expensively equipped army in Europe. Armored knights, artillery, professional infantry, mercenaries hired from Italy and England. Facing him across the field of Grandson on March 2, 1476, are Swiss farmers with long sticks. Within an hour, Charles has lost his army, his treasury, his artillery park, and his tent, complete with his silver dinner service still laid for supper. He escapes on horseback. He will be dead within a year. The Swiss military revolution of the 14th through 16th centuries is documented in Burgundian, Habsburg, and French chronicles, in Swiss Confederacy records, and in the chronicles of Swiss cities. Michael Mallet analyzed the mercenary economics of the period in Mercenaries and Their Masters from 1974. Thomas Arnold examined the tactical transformation in The Renaissance at War from 2001. Kelly DeVries produced the most detailed infantry analysis in infantry warfare in the early 14th century from 1996. The battles of Grandson, Murat, and Nancy, all fought within a 12-month period in 1476 and 1477, are among the most thoroughly documented military engagements of the 15th century. The Swiss Reisläufer, the word means those who travel for war, had no cavalry, no tradition of military nobility, no standing army between campaigns, and no access to the military theory governing European warfare at the time. What they had was a pike and a specific, apparently indestructible refusal to stop moving forward. The Battle of Morgarten on November 15, 1315, established the pattern. Approximately 1,500 Swiss infantry ambushed a Habsburg force of 8,000 to 9,000 men, including heavy cavalry, in a narrow alpine pass. The Swiss lost fewer than 50 men. The Habsburgs lost an estimated 1,500 to 2,000, including most of their mounted forces. Medieval military doctrine held that cavalry defeated infantry in open engagement. Morgarten did not fit the doctrine, so the doctrine was quietly set aside and the Swiss were hired. At Grandson, the captured Burgundian camp contained Charles's treasury estimated at 72 tons of gold and silver, according to contemporary Burgundian records, his personal jewel collection, his artillery park of 400 guns, and three of the five largest diamonds known in Europe at the time. At Nancy on January 5, 1477, the Swiss found Charles the Bold's body 2 days after the battle, naked, face down in a frozen pond with a pike wound through the skull. The richest nobleman in Europe had been killed by a peasant with a stick and left in a ditch. His body was identified partly by his physician, who recognized the Duke's unusually long fingernails. Kelly de Vries documents that the Swiss refusal to ransom noble prisoners was recorded policy, not battlefield anger. The Swiss had concluded that the ransom economy incentivized the nobility to treat war as a commercial enterprise. By killing everyone, they made war genuinely costly for the other side, a calculation no other medieval force was willing to make. After Nancy, France, the papacy, Milan, and Venice all began hiring Swiss Reisläufer as mercenaries. The Swiss Guard at the Vatican is the last surviving institutional remnant of this arrangement. 500 years after their military dominance ended, Swiss soldiers still guard the most powerful religious office on earth. The Pike Square formation required 3,000 to 10,000 men to advance in close order at a controlled pace into cavalry charges and artillery fire. Military psychologists identify the ability to keep moving forward when the man beside you falls as one of the most demanding collective behaviors humans can be trained to perform. The Swiss dominance lasted almost exactly until the Battle of Bicaca in 1522, where Spanish arquebusiers behind field fortifications destroyed a Swiss pike advance. Even then, the Pike Square remained a feature of European armies for another century. Military historians explain Swiss success through terrain advantage, social cohesion, and genuine tactical innovation. A confederation defending shared political independence has higher motivation than a mercenary army. The Pike Square was a technical advance that neutralized heavy cavalry. The refusal to ransom was pragmatic. Peasants had nothing to gain from an economic system designed exclusively for the nobility. But motivation and terrain do not explain Grandson and Nancy, which were fought on relatively flat ground against professional armies with artillery. And the refusal to ransom is stranger than it appears on first reading. It meant the Swiss were fighting for nothing except victory itself. In an era when every other combatant was fighting for something extractable from even a loss, they had voluntarily removed their own exit ramp. Some military historians ask whether the Swiss created the first genuinely republican military culture in post-classical Europe, a force whose cohesion derived from the literal absence of a lord, where every man was fighting for the man beside him because there was nobody above either of them. If so, their 150 years of dominance was not primarily a tactical story, it was a political one, and it raises a question that history has not fully answered. Why did this work only here, only then, only for them? Top 7. The Zulu Ibuto System. From the mountain meadows of Switzerland, we travel to southern Africa to a kingdom that solved the problem of military motivation, not through political freedom, but through the controlled deprivation of the most basic human desire, the Zulu Ibuto system. You are 22 years old. You are by every measure available to you an excellent soldier. Your regiment has never lost a significant engagement, but you cannot marry. You cannot own cattle in your own name. You cannot start a family or establish a household. By the formal definition of the society you live in, you are not yet an adult. You will not be permitted to become one until the king decides your regiment has earned it, and the king, according to the structure of the system itself, will not make that decision until there has been a war. The Ibuto system is documented through Zulu oral history collected and analyzed across the 20th century, through the accounts of European traders and missionaries who observed the Zulu kingdom directly in the 1820s through 1860s, notably Henry Francis Finn and Nathaniel Isaacs, through British military records from the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879, and through modern scholarship. John Laban's Rope of Sand, The Rise and Fall of the Zulu Kingdom from 1995 provides the most detailed internal analysis. John Keegan examined the system's broader military logic in A History of Warfare from 1993. Shaka reorganized an existing Nguni age-grade tradition into something qualitatively different. The Abuto enrolled all males of similar age into a single regiment at roughly 18 to 20 years old, regardless of lineage or family background. Each regiment lived together, trained together, and was deployed together. Laban's analysis identifies over 30 named Amabuto regiments in the Zulu kingdom between 1816 and 1879, each with its own name, distinctive shield colors, and regimental songs maintained as living oral history across generations. Marriage was forbidden until the king granted formal permission, typically in the men's late 30s or early 40s. Men who attempted to marry without permission risked execution. Henry Francis Finn, arriving at Shaka's court in 1824, documented in his diary that senior warriors in their 40s were still formally enrolled as unmarried soldiers. He was not describing an edge case. He was describing the system functioning as intended. The tactical formation that emerged from this structure was the impondo, the chest and horns, a central mass for frontal engagement, two flanking wings for envelopment, and a reserve held behind. British military analysts studying the Anglo-Zulu War identified it as a sophisticated tactical system requiring high coordination and discipline to execute consistently across units trained at separate locations and deployed simultaneously. At Asandawana on January 22, 1879, approximately 20,000 Zulu warriors destroyed a British column of 1,800 soldiers, including 600 regular infantry armed with Martini Henry rifles, the most effective infantry weapon of the era. The Zulus suffered an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 dead. The British lost approximately 1,300 men, including 52 officers. It remains one of the worst defeats inflicted on a British regular force in the 19th century, and it was inflicted by an army that advanced into rifle fire without flinching. John Keegan's analysis identifies the Abuto as one of the most effective military motivation structures ever devised, specifically because it aligned the warrior's personal interest in achieving adulthood with the state's military interest in winning wars so completely that coercion became structurally unnecessary. The system did not need to punish cowardice because it had removed the conditions under which cowardice makes rational sense. And after the British defeated the Zulu kingdom in 1879, their first policy priority was the deliberate dismantling of the Abuto system, breaking up the age regiments and permitting free marriage. The British correctly identified that the regiments, not the weapons, were the actual military threat. Military historians explain the Abuto as an adaptation of an older tradition amplified by Shaka into an explicit instrument of military, economic, and political control. The delayed marriage age concentrated young male energy into service while keeping cattle wealth centralized in royal hands. The system was internally rational and served multiple simultaneous purposes, but economic management does not explain Isandawana. British officers reported Zulu warriors advancing into Martini Henry fire with no reduction in pace, sustaining casualties that would have caused any European unit to halt and reform. Some historians ask whether Shaka's system was the most sophisticated documented example of social leverage as a military instrument. The idea that the most durable fighting force is not one that fears death, but one that has calculated that the cost of not fighting exceeds the cost of dying. Were the Abuto warriors not fearless, but simply operating under a set of incentives in which courage was the only rational choice available? We may never have a complete answer, but the British knew enough to destroy the system before they tried to govern what remained of the kingdom. Top 8. The Varangian Guard. The Zulu system built warriors by controlling what they were permitted to become. The next force built the most trusted bodyguard in the medieval world by choosing men for precisely the opposite quality, by selecting men who came from somewhere else entirely. The Varangian Guard, the emperor of Rome's successor state, master of Greek fire, ruler of a court where every official title carries centuries of procedural weight, commander of the most complex military bureaucracy in the medieval world, has decided that the men he trusts most with his life are large, axe-carrying Vikings from the Baltic coast who cannot pronounce his name. The Varangian Guard is documented in Byzantine chronicles, including John Skylitz's, and in Anna Komnene's Alexiad, written around 1148. Norse sagas, including the Laxdæla saga and Eyrbyggja saga, record individual Varangians by name. Three Swedish runestones analyzed by Birgit Sawyer in the Viking Age runestones from 2000 commemorate men who died in Greece or went east to Constantinople. External corroboration of recruitment from Scandinavia proper, not only from the Rus territories. Most remarkably, the Guard left physical evidence in Constantinople itself. Runic carvings scratched into the marble balustrade of the Hagia Sophia that are still visible today. Modern scholarship includes Sigfús Blöndal's The Varangians of Byzantium from 1978 and Jonathan Shepard's research on Byzantine-Norse relations. The Guard was formally established in 988 CE. Emperor Basil II received 6,000 Norse-Rus warriors from Prince Vladimir of Kiev as part of a political alliance and immediately deployed them not as a field army, but as the Imperial Personal Guard, a function they retained for over 250 years through some of the most turbulent succession crises in Byzantine history. Anna Komnene describes them as axe-bearing barbarians and records their absolute loyalty with evident admiration, specifically noting that their loyalty was to the person of the emperor rather than to the Byzantine political system, which meant they remained reliable during precisely the coups and civil wars that made everyone around them unreliable. The runic inscription in the Hagia Sophia reads, in transliteration, Halfdan carved these runes. It is almost certainly the work of a bored Varangian standing watch during a ceremony, scratching his name into the most sacred building in Christendom, because it seemed at the time like a reasonable thing to do. It is still there. Harald Hardrada, who later became King of Norway and died at Stamford Bridge in 1066, 3 weeks before the Battle of Hastings, served as a senior Varangian officer in the 1030s and 1040s, participating in Byzantine campaigns in Sicily, Bulgaria, and Anatolia before returning north. His career arc is documented in both Byzantine and Norse sources, and it is one of the stranger biographies the medieval world produced. The Byzantine court term for the Guard's drinking privileges was peligrimoui. They had a formally documented right to become ceremonially drunk in the palace on specific occasions, written into their service contract and apparently honored by both parties without apparent tension. John Skylitzes records that when Emperor Nikephoros III was deposed in 1081, the Varangian Guard initially resisted Alexios Komnenos' coup, not from loyalty to Nikephoros personally, but because the coup violated the procedural protocol they had been contracted to defend. Once Alexios was formally acclaimed, they transferred their loyalty immediately. The loyalty was to the office, not the man. That distinction is what made them valuable. Historians explain the choice of foreign bodyguards through the Byzantine Empire's long-standing use of ethnic outsiders for sensitive security roles. A Norse warrior could not become emperor, could not be bribed with political promises from a rival claimant, and had no family network inside Byzantine court politics to compromise. Foreignness was a security feature deliberately engineered into the role. But the specific choice of Norse warriors goes beyond security logic. Byzantium had access to Armenian soldiers, Georgian warriors, Bulgar mercenaries, and Arab fighters, all culturally and linguistically closer to the imperial court. They chose men who needed translators, drank by contract, and came from a tradition that, as we have seen, included going berserk. Some historians ask whether the Varangian Guard represented a quiet acknowledgement that the empire's own military culture had gradually optimized away something it could no longer produce domestically, a quality of individual aggression, a willingness to close with an enemy at personal risk that centuries of bureaucratic military management had slowly bred out of the professional Byzantine soldier. Were the Varangians hired despite being barbarians? Or was that the reason all along? Top 9. The Roman Decimation. From the court of Constantinople, we travel west and south to the flat plains of southern Italy, where a Roman general was about to revive a punishment so extreme that Rome had barely used it in generations, and whose name would survive long enough to enter every modern European language. The Roman Decimation. You are a Roman soldier, and you have done something unforgivable. Your unit broke. You ran from an enemy that Rome does not run from. And now your general has divided your cohort into groups of 10 and handed each group one instruction. Pick one man from among yourselves and beat him to death with your own hands. You may draw the lot. The man who saved the standard might draw it. The man who tried to stop the rout might draw it. That is not a flaw in the system. that is the system. Decimation is documented in Polybius's Histories around 150 BCE, in Livy's History of Rome, in Appian's Civil Wars, and in Plutarch's Life of Crassus. The most historically verified instance is Marcus Licinius Crassus's decimation of 2 legions following their defeat by the slave rebel Spartacus in 71 BCE, recorded in multiple independent sources. Adrian Goldsworthy analyzed the practice in The Complete Roman Army from 2003. Kate Gilliver examined its social mechanics in The Roman Art of War from 1999. Polybius in Histories. Book 6, Section 38 describes the procedure directly. The tribune divides the condemned unit into groups of 10. Lots are drawn. The selected man is beaten to death by the other 9 using cudgels or stones. The survivors are then issued barley instead of wheat rations, a dietary humiliation that marked them publicly, and forced to sleep outside the camp perimeter, exposed to enemy attack for a defined period afterward. The punishment did not end at dawn. It continued through the remainder of their service. Plutarch's Life of Crassus, Section 10, describes the 71 BCE application. After 2 legions fled from Spartacus, Crassus punished approximately 500 men from a force of about 24,000, roughly 1 in 48 executed, considerably less than the full 1 in 10 the name implies. This calibration suggests the practice was not mechanical. It was a judgment applied with attention to circumstance. The Roman word decimatio has given every European language a common term for catastrophic loss. That a military punishment becomes universal vocabulary across 2,000 years of language change is its own form of evidence. Evidence of how deeply the concept embedded itself in cultural memory across the civilizations that inherited Rome. Adrian Goldsworthy's analysis identifies approximately a dozen documented cases of decimation across 5 centuries of Roman military history. That rarity is itself significant. Every Roman soldier knew the practice existed. Every Roman soldier knew it could select a man who had done nothing wrong. The rarity ensured it was never normalized into something that could be rationalized away. The lottery mechanism was specifically designed to prevent solidarity-based resistance. If the guilty are selected, the innocent may feel justified resentment and resist collectively. If the selection is random, every man is simultaneously potential victim and potential executioner. That structure dissolves the social logic of collective resistance before it can form. Julius Caesar threatened decimation twice against his 9th Legion in 47 BCE and in a separate context, and both times the threat alone produced compliance without a single execution. These documented cases of deterrence without application are data points in themselves. The mechanism functioned at distance, not only in use. Military historians explain decimation as a rational solution to the Roman army's central disciplinary problem. Units far too large for any officer to personally monitor required a collective accountability mechanism. If the unit suffers for the unit's failure, regardless of individual performance, every soldier develops an incentive to prevent his neighbors from failing, not from virtue, but from arithmetic. But the system's rarity undermines the purely rational reading. If collective statistical punishment is the optimal solution to unit discipline, it should be standard practice. Instead, it was used roughly a dozen times in 5 centuries, almost always by commanders in political or strategic crisis who needed to demonstrate ruthlessness to audiences beyond the unit itself. Crassus decimated his legions in front of the rest of the army before resuming the campaign against Spartacus. The primary audience was not the punished cohort. It was everyone watching from the outside. Some historians ask whether decimation was primarily a communication device rather than a disciplinary one. A ritual performance of Roman institutional will designed to signal to allies, enemies, the Senate, and every other soldier in the field that a specific commander would do absolutely anything the moment required. In that reading, the randomness was not incidental to the message. It was the message. Rome's authority is not personal, not judicial, not proportionate. It is structural and absolute. And if it has to, it will select you by lottery. 10 warriors, 10 systems, 10 different cultures separated by centuries and continents. All of them asking the same question. How do you make a human being do something that every instinct says not to do? Look at what these 10 actually share. And it is not geography, not era, not weapons technology. Every entry on this list represents a culture that found a way to reach past the survival instinct and replace it with something else. The berserkers replaced pain with what may have been an altered neurological state. The Hashashin replaced immediate fear with patience stretched across years. The Aztec warriors replaced the kill instinct with a more demanding discipline. The Spartans replaced childhood with a system that never relented. The Immortals replaced individual mortality with an administrative number. The Swiss replaced loyalty upward with loyalty sideways across a flat line of equals. The Zulu replaced the desire for peace with the requirement to earn it. The Varangians were chosen because their foreignness made their loyalty structurally incorruptible. Rome replaced individual justice with collective arithmetic and called it doctrine. The Companions replaced tactical reason with personal faith in one man's judgment. The mainstream view of military history frames all of this as rational evolution. Cultures solve problems. They find what works. They discard what does not. Each of these systems was, in that reading, an innovation, a logical response to a specific military and social challenge. And the mainstream view is largely correct. These were not accidents. They were engineered solutions. And most of them worked for exactly the reasons their designers intended. But the engineering in every case required a willingness to accept a cost that most systems would have refused. Sparta accepted demographic collapse as the price of quality. The Abutho accepted that its warriors would reach middle age without families. The Companions accepted officer casualty rates that should have broken the formation's willingness to charge. Rome accepted that it would execute innocent men by lottery, and that the survivors would perform better for it. The Hashashin accepted that some of their operatives would disappear into cover identities for years with no guarantee of extraction. What supposedly separates these warriors from every other soldier who ever lived is not their skill alone. Though the skill was real and documentable, it is that they were produced by systems willing to demand the impossible and found repeatedly that some human beings will meet that demand. We may never fully understand why, but the fact that so many cultures across so many centuries arrived independently at similar answers suggests something that archaeology and military history have not yet fully named. Some capacity in the human nervous system that under specific conditions transforms into something we barely recognize as the thing we started with. Most people hear about these warriors and see a museum exhibit, armor behind glass, a placard with dates. They accept the explanation and walk on. But you followed all 10 of these systems to their foundations. The lottery, the wolves, the flower war, the frozen pond at Nancy, the runes scratched into the Hagia Sophia marble by a bored man with an axe on his belt. You did not accept the placard. That is not a small thing. If these stories of warriors who defied the limits of human nature changed how you see the history of conflict, please subscribe and like the channel. We are digging into the legacies that time tried to bury. Help us plant the seeds for the future. Our next historical treasure will be unearthed soon. Before you leave, drop a comment with the one warrior from this list whose system on paper should not have worked. Make the case. The floor is yours. Somewhere in the north of France, 1,000 years ago, a man bit down on the rim of a wooden shield, not because he was told to, not because it helped him fight, but because something in him had already crossed a line that the rest of the world had agreed very reasonably never to approach. We built cities and laws and museums to get as far from that line as possible, and yet here we are, still asking about the men who lived on the other side of it. Some doors, once you have looked through them, do not close.